right now. Hi, everybody. Mark and Jeff back for another history podcast. What's going on, folks? Today, we're talking about Tudor England. You can see right behind me. Mark, did you notice this lovely royal standard from
I did.
7th all the way through Elizabeth I? So this is encompassing our entire thing. This actually, believe it or not, Mark, this shows the amount of a nerd that I actually am. This royal standard flies in front of my house. I don't have a
Nice.
I don't have a Royals flag or a Chiefs flag or sporting or anything like that. I have the royal standard from the 1500s. So kind of a big nerd. Today we're talking about Tudor England. So I know this is something popular. You know, you can probably rattle off a few things about misconceptions or things you know about Henry VIII or Elizabeth I. How many TV shows are there, Mark? My gosh.
A lot, because that's how I research. I do as little reading as possible. If there's a movie or a documentary or an audiobook or someone like you that can just tell me about it, that's the way I prefer to research. So there's a lot out there.
Absolutely. TV shows are way better. As far as historical accuracy, they are, who cares? You know what, that's what our preconceived notions are. And that's sort of what we're here for, is to kind of talk about some of those preconceived notions and a little bit about kind of what the impact of the Tudor period really was. You know, it lasted from 1485 up through 1603, and it actually includes the Elizabethan period. So I know, Mark, you're going to talk a little bit about Elizabeth I later, who is quite a fascinating monarch. We'll touch really big on her. I'm going to touch on a couple of these smaller monarchs, but Mark's going to really take the reins a little bit and talk about Henry VIII, talk about Elizabeth I, and really sort of, kind of what their impacts were. During the Tudor period, John Guy argued that, this is, I think, in 1998, that England was economically healthier, more expansive, and more optimistic under the Tudors than at any other time since the Roman occupation. What a period it actually was of growth in England. The population grew after coming out of the Black Death. The economy flourished. Agriculture began to be increasingly commercialized. So instead of just kind of pure agrarian society, we actually began to see the Tudors start taking this and seeing more trade increase, wool production increase greatly. And you start really seeing sort of the kind of the birth of that, I guess, economic powerhouse that England was to become. Wouldn't you agree with that, Mark?
Yep, and it's a super juicy period, man. There's lots of drama, lots of Kardashian type stuff that went on. So yeah, it was a fun period of time to look at.
It really was. Just a couple other things. It was a hard life. The life expectancy was pretty short. If you reached 40 years old, you were an old person, man. You really, that's the geriatric age you start seeing. So good luck to you. There was about a 14%. Yeah, exactly. 14% of kids died before their first birthday. So pretty darn heavy. For example, I believe that Henry VII, who I'll touch on just briefly here in a minute, the start of that Tudor dynasty, I think he had 6 kids and only 4 lived past the age of 1. So not real great. There were no police in Tudor England. It was the law was sort of the law, and people would be this is the part that you think of the bloody Tudor dynasty, and it kind of was, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
People would be killed for murder, executed for murder, but people would be executed for even more little petty crimes, like dude, you stole anything over 5 pence and you were subject to being hung. Crimes against the state, you were drawn and quartered, for God's sake. Hung
or married to Henry VIII.
Or married to Henry VIII, which is sort of the same thing, isn't it? I mean, kind of was a death penalty a little bit. So he was quite the guy. And during the Tudor period, obviously, we saw the Reformation and sort of the change in religion and the back and forth between the Catholics and the Protestants about who would rule England. You had the Catholics, the staunch Catholics, then you had the Protestants, who, because Henry couldn't keep it in his pants and just really wanted to, his way. So we see the Protestants, and then later on, his boy comes in, Edward VI, and says, no, we're going back to, we're going to stay. It's just back and forth. So very, very interesting stuff. So So what have you kind of got here so far, Mark, on your end there? Tell me a little bit about it,
I
guys.
got some dirt on Henry VIII, and his many wives. I got a little bit of information on Lady Jane Grey, our 9-day queen, and then of course some pretty badass stuff about Elizabeth I. So you want me to jump into Henry VIII, or do you want to cover? Are you good on those two guys before him?
Well, you know, the Tudor period, it started with Henry VII, and Henry VII was, if nothing else, mundane. He reigned from 1491 to 1547, really, or I'm sorry, 1485 to 1509, a very short reign. He kind of came in the culmination of the Battle of the Roses, and that's where you see the Lancastrian rose, which is the Tudor rose, which is a combination of the York and Lancastrian houses out of that War of the Roses, that bloody long period. He came out of that and sort of consolidated power and became Henry VII, and it started everything kind of rolling for the Tudor dynasty. I think the greatest thing he did probably was raise taxes on people and spend everything he could spend in the royal treasury. He was a spendthrift and not the most effective king in the world, but he gave rise to
Henry VIII, I-am. I feel like that should be sung with like a Cockney accent, right? I don't know.
I am Henry VIII. I am Henry VIII.
There you go.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay. Henry VIII definitely, probably he had to be the key checkpoint in the Tudor dynasty. I mean, it was probably the climax, as you will, of that period of time. And Henry VIII is known for a number of things, but the two biggest things to know about Henry VIII are, one, his marriages, of which there were many. He was married 6 times, and at least 2 of those were executed, and some others died under mysterious circumstances. And then also
childbirth.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, the flu. And then also, which is kind of tied in with all his marriages, obviously, you mentioned the Reformation and how he contributed to England pretty much leaving the Catholic Church and getting out from under the authority of the Pope. So I'm going to do a lightning round on his 6 wives. Give you a quick little profile on each one and how they ended or didn't end, and we'll kind of go from there. But so wife number 1. Very important wife, Catherine of Aragon. Oh, and this is the other thing. 6 wives, all of whom were named Anne or Catherine, with exception to 1 who was Jane. So if you want to sound smart at a party and you just talk about Henry VIII's wife, Anne or Catherine, you're going to be right. So just jot that down.
He had a type.
He did. He said, Catherine or Anne, you're in. Okay, so Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, she becomes important. She had a rough time getting pregnant. Or giving birth, had a number of miscarriages, number of stillbirths. Eventually did have a daughter, Mary, but Henry really wanted a male heir and eventually grew impatient with her. Nice guy, right? And wants to get a divorce or an annulment, kind of the same thing back then. And so goes to the Pope and says, hey, I need to move on. I need a new wife. And the Pope says, nope, not going to happen. So Henry says, yeah, I think it is. And so that's kind of where the split happens, and Henry kind of works with his people in his courts and some of his, I don't know the titles, the cardinals, the ministers, or whatever, and they eventually pull England out of the papal rule or the authority of the Pope. And so that was a huge deal. We can do an entire season on that whole event right there. But so if you want more information on that, look for Church of England Reformation, that kind of stuff. But
I actually am a member of the Church of England, Mark. So yeah, I am an Episcopalian, which is in the American version of the Church of England. And yeah, it's one day Henry is, the Pope. I mean, wasn't really a question. The Pope is the head of the church, right? Well, wait, not so fast. Now I am, says King Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes
loophole. Yeah. So he eventually does get divorced because he then makes the rules, and so he arranges to be divorced from Catherine. She kind of goes off, lives on her own for a while, and then dies of an illness. But many believe she was poisoned, and probably just because Henry wanted her out of the picture, even though the divorce was Yeah, he wanted a clean cut from that. So then he moves on to Anne of Boleyn, who he was already kind of having some things going on with her. She was a lady in waiting for his last wife, Catherine, which basically means she was kind of an assistant, kind of hung out in the courts with Catherine of Aragon.
He was
She
he was infatuated with her, wasn't he? Just
correct. Yep. Yeah. He had been eyeballing her for a very long time, obsessing over her. And here's the funny thing: he finally gets her, and turns out not only is she really beautiful, she's also really smart and not very submissive, which was not going to roll well with Henry VIII. And so they just didn't really click. She had a number of miscarriages as well. And that combined with the fact that she wasn't going to do everything Henry told her to do, he wanted to get an annulment for this one. He's like, I did it the first time, we tried it the second time, wasn't able to pull that off. I think even his people were like, you 2 in a row, not going to work. Right around that same time, though, Anne's brother was involved in some kind of treason plot with another group of guys. And so Henry basically just kind of folded her into that, was like, you guys are all treasonous, and basically got her out of the picture by having her executed along with her brother and that whole party.
behold,
Before that,
traitor.
that's right. However, she did have a daughter before that happened with Henry. So she gave Henry a daughter by the name of Elizabeth, who's going to become very, very important here in just a little bit. So,
Never heard of her.
so now at this point, Henry VIII has been married twice and has 2 daughters. So he's got Mary and Elizabeth, still no male heir. Moving on to wife number 3, Jane Seymour. Jane, and it looks like he may have been involved with her while he was married to Anne. And I think that's a theme with Henry. He kind of has this gray transition from one to the other, because he married her 10 days later after Anne is executed. He's married to Jane, and she actually gives Henry a healthy heir, who would become, and Edward VI, correct. But in doing so, Jane dies either during or shortly after childbirth. So, again, who knows how that really went down, but she was no more, and now Henry was single, has a male heir, that box is checked, has 2 daughters. Wife number 4, Anne, surprise, Anne of Cleves this time. And this is kind of a funny, I don't know if I interpreted this correctly, but the way I kind of see this, at this point, he wasn't as interested in remarrying. He had his male heir, that was checked off.
Yep.
And there's, I don't know if maybe he really did love this last Jane Seymour, but there's some signs that maybe he was depressed between wife 3 and wife 4, because he kind of had to be talked into wife 4. Anne of Cleves had some political ties that people in his court saw some value in. And so people in his court were like, hey, you should check out this Anne of Cleves gal. And he's like, I'm not really feeling it. So someone in his court says, but have you seen a picture of this girl? He's like, yeah. So this guy has a portrait of Anne of Cleves painted, and brings it back. Basically, this is like the first documented case of like a Playboy trifold, right? He's like, have you seen Anne of Cleves?
Have you seen Anne of Cleves?
Boom. And it's like scrolls. And Henry's like, yeah, let's set that up. So he ends up marrying Anne of Cleves.
But tell me this is true. I actually I've seen, and I don't know if it's anecdotal, if it's true, that when she came, he was like, oh my God. It's like looking at that Twitter picture, this really handsome guy. And when you see him or her in real life, you go, Jesus Christ, how old is that picture?
Yeah, there was, and I think the guy that painted it may have run into some troubles for that, because there were some inaccuracies, and I feel bad for that guy, because he's being pulled by both sides. He's like, this paint better be really good. We got to make this.
We got to marry this gal off, because she's she's unfortunate.
Yeah. So he ends up with Anne of Cleves. They really aren't interested in each other at all. Obviously, he was not a fan of her as soon as he met her in person. They just didn't really click. He was actually able to successfully get a divorce from her. She got a nice, handsome settlement.
Consummated. So it was just it was an annulment, wasn't it? It was never consummated.
They both agreed to that. They were like, yeah.
Not touching them.
She was like,
Hard
And,
pass,
and
hard pass, hard pass.
I think of all the wives, she probably made it out the best. You know, she got a really nice settlement, well taken care of, and we don't really hear much more from her. So no weird deaths or anything that I could find. So brings on wife number 5, Catherine. Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard was the first wife of Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife. Or I'm sorry, the first cousin of Anne Boleyn, who was Henry's second wife. Jeez. I hope if you're at home, I hope you're sketching out a family tree of this, because you need to. But this didn't last very long either. But actually, in Henry's defense, if you can say that, she had an affair twice. So 2 times. She had 2 kind of boy ties on the side. One was kind of before he was married, and one was kind of during. And so this came about. I believe she went to trial over it. Henry found out about it, didn't really believe it, but then saw evidence, and so he had her executed along with her boy toys. So that was Catherine Howard. And then finally on to his last wife, wife number 6, Catherine again, Catherine Parr with 2 R's. This is, I couldn't find a whole lot about her, but she seems to have done okay. She outlives Henry. Which probably his first wife to outlive Henry. She goes on to like publish a book, and she retires, which I didn't know you can do that, but she retires from her position as queen when Edward VI is coronated, and she goes off to live happily ever after. I believe, from what I can find. So a lot of drama there. Henry VIII, he did not waste any time in marriages. He cycled through them like a vending machine, and was.
So I'm sensing a pattern, Mark. I'm sensing a pattern.
And here's the ironic part: is I did find a couple places where it said that, maybe not a great newlywed husband or a divorcing husband, but he was said to be a really good husband in that middle part. He was known to be really loving and really generous and caring towards his wives.
He would be all in at the beginning, from what I understand, especially several of these, especially, early on in these marriages, he'd go, oh my gosh, Anne Boleyn, I am infatuated. He built giant kitchens in this giant guest house, this giant piece at the Tower of London, just to welcome her in, and parades and animals and God knows whatever else they do. I'm sure he tweeted it several times about how much he loved Anne Boleyn, but he would just be all in, and then all of a sudden, I'm kind of bored with you. So, or you didn't give me what I needed.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, he was
he was kind of an a-hole.
Yeah, I think so, and I think any current wife listening to this would agree. Yeah, not a great dude. But it was funny that I had read that 2 or 3 times. Some of the research I had done, I was like, well, where are you getting this from? But there must be scrolls out there somewhere, diaries where, they found tidbits of happy happy wives. But yeah, Henry VIII,
quite a guy. We have a couple of people who were kind of in that Are you kind of done with Henry VIII? I'm sorry, I just kind of just jump right in.
I'm good. Yeah.
Everyone's been waiting for Edward VI. His we talked about his only male heir. It's hard to say. And he took the throne when he was at the ripe old age of 9. And he ruled from 1547 to 1553. He really was a very, very ineffective little man, but he was very much into he was very, very much into returning the church back to Protestantism. He wanted to get rid of all the Catholics as much as he possibly could. He died in 1509 of consumption, tuberculosis, who knows? But it was a very short, very kind of ineffective reign. And then we went on to Mary the First. And Mary the First, Bloody Mary, of course, you've all heard of her, the daughter of Henry VIII by Catherine of Aragon. We talked about that. She's very much a Catholic, so her job was to go try to undo everything that Henry and of course Edward VI wanted to do, and that's to make Protestant rule the land. She wanted to undo all of that. And she did, and she actually did some interesting things. She really helped to grow the Navy. She really helped to do some. She crushed in a rebellion, Wyatt's Rebellion, may or may not, just look that up at some point. She's known as Bloody Mary for her persecution, though, of the Protestants. She was really not nice to the Protestants at all. She wanted to rid them of everything like that, and get Catholicism back as everything to England. She believed in the absolute rule of the Pope, and the actual polar opposite of everything that Henry and Edward VI talked about. So, and then this leads on to one of my favorite royal characters of all time, and that's Elizabeth I, who you've done a little bit of research on, I understand. So she was a fascinating character, wasn't she?
She was, yeah. Do we want to talk Lady Jane Grey, or is that?
Oh, I forgot about Lady Jane Grey. How can we forget about Lady Jane Grey? And
it's kind of easy to do because there's such a short period of time that she played in the Tudor dynasty, but there's a couple tidbits that are worth mentioning. Anna, I'm drinking in her honor, Lady Grey.
Okay, quite there we go, Lady Jane.
And it's terrible. It is absolutely terrible. So,
but I don't like Earl Grey either. I just like both the gray teas. But yeah, how can we forget about Lady Jane Grey and her and her reign is over?
That's it. That was that quick. So she's called the 9-day queen. Guess why? She was queen for 9 days. Said to be very, very smart, very, very beautiful. She was the granddaughter of Henry VII. Second cousin. It says first cousin once removed. I call it second cousin of Edward VI. So your guy that we just talked about. And Edward Eddie. He must have liked Lady Jane Grey, because in his will he said, I want all her male heirs to get the throne when I'm gone. And apparently that did not go over well with a large chunk of England.
All of Mary's people, because Mary was very, very popular, and a lot of people wanted Mary to be in. So these people said, "Are you joking me? Mary should be queen. She's actually got a good, the straight line to the Tudor monarchy, being one of Henry's daughters." So.
Absolutely. And Mary, being such a proponent of the Catholic Church, Jane was completely opposite. She was known to be kind of a hero of the Protestant Church, and even a martyr, which we'll see here in just a second. Edward VI dies, she becomes queen, falls into this immediate opposition because England's like, they're still kind of on this Mary streak. And eventually her father-in-law is accused of treason. He's executed, and I think it's a couple months. No, obviously not a couple months, because she was only in for a few days. A couple days later, she's folded into that same conspiracy, and she's executed. So she was a queen for 9 days, and she was executed at the ripe old age of 17.
And Dudley, obviously, Lord Dudley was her husband, and then his father was the one you're talking about. That the Dudleys, they really, really pushed to make her queen, and he did he make himself? I can't remember what he even called himself, but he somehow was able to get a royal title, and then push hard for Lady Jane Grey to become queen. Yeah.
And now that brings us on to Elizabeth I, which there's no shortage of movies and series to watch on her. Was it Cate Blanchett that played her in one?
It was, and she was absolutely. But Cate Blanchett's great and everything, so probably not fair. But she played a wonderful. What you envision when I envision Elizabeth I. That's
with the elegant, and the collar that comes up, all that. So Elizabeth I had a nickname, the Virgin Queen. She never married, and she lived to be, I think she lived to about 70, which was significant, obviously, when the average age is 40 at that time, and even less if you were in any kind of one of these royal families, obviously. She was Henry's
If you
Henry
married
VIII.
Henry, it became significantly lower, I think. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, yeah. You were lucky if you made it into the 20s.
Mhm.
But Elizabeth the First, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, if you remember back a ways, that was
Yeah, yeah.
the one child that Anne gave him. And she always fought issues of illegitimacy because of Henry's marriage to Anne, which was annulled and questionable there. So she always kind of faced this opposition of people questioning whether or not she really was the rightful queen. But she was pretty badass, super smart, very, very good at improving the reputation of England globally as I guess what we would call what do we call it? A superpower, and the other big country that would have been rivaled would have been Spain at this point. So she becomes queen at 25 years old. She was also considered a hero of the Protestant cause, so she was good on that side. But she
Undoing
also
what Mary wanted to do, and that's return England to Catholicism. She now is back and forth and back and forth. Catholics and Protestants, man. Catholics and Protestants.
always, and I think what Elizabeth was somewhat successful in doing was quelling a little bit of that and trying to smooth over tensions there. I don't think they ever fully did, but she was known for trying to do that. But the big thing with Elizabeth I, again, very strategically intelligent as far as politics go, and as far as military goes. So much so that she was in power when the Spanish Armada was sunk. I think it was at 1520-ish, something. 1500s. Spanish Armada is sunk, which is it's huge. Like this would have been a bigger event than our Pearl Harbor. I mean, to bring down the Spanish Armada, which was the strongest navy in the world at that point, and England was just now starting to restore its reputation as a superpower. Comes out of nowhere in their navy, sinks the Armada. Was it in the English Channel?
It was in the English Channel. It was in 1558, and it was in the English Channel actually, and it was a brilliant tactical victory by the Royal Navy using these more shallow draft boats and attacking this gigantic, not very maneuverable navy, who in Spain had really hegemony over the seas at that time, and England was kind of a budding naval power, and you can kind of see that just flip flop here. This was kind of that watershed event right there. Yeah,
it was huge. Again, and Elizabeth is another person that we can spend probably an entire season on. Look into her, look her up, watch her movies. She was a pretty badass queen.
And one of a very long reign, didn't she? I mean, she was like a 50-year reign. Was she the longest?
I think so.
Until Elizabeth II, her namesake, has now obviously surpassed that by a huge margin. But she was at that point, she and George III, the super long reigning monarchs, gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, 1558 to 1603, that's a pretty substantial little chunk of time.
Again, blowing the averages out of the water.
Well, she wasn't married to
along
Henry.
With the Armada.
She wasn't married to Henry.
She didn't have the risk of a husband.
That's a box you can tick and say, oh, I wasn't married to him. So that's always good.
Yeah. So that's Elizabeth I. I mean, again, there's plenty more to add. I know she was. I know you're a big fan of her, so I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that. But
I think the great thing about Elizabeth to me was her eye on really the diplomacy of England, and really taking in the face of the French or the Spanish, taking her rightful place and taking England's rightful place as kind of that real budding superpower, and building the Navy and trying to your point, she was a staunch a Protestant, but not keeping the war going, as it were, stopping kind of the bloodshed. Can we all just get along a little bit? So again, with Elizabeth, and I know we've gone quite a while, but with Elizabeth, we could have an entire episode, and maybe we will sometime. We'll ask everybody if we want to take a deep dive on Elizabeth I, because I absolutely love her to death. What else do we know about then the Tudor era in general, Mark? What are the key takeaways here for us?
Yeah. So, and this I knew very, very little. I was familiar with the Henry VIII, the song. That was about it before I started jumping into this. But again, it's a very dramatic period, a big key point for English history and worldwide history, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, a lot of drama. I think of Henry VIII, and I think of his wives, and I think of the Kardashians, and you know, if they had reality TV back then, would have been huge.
Like the Kardashians who have types, Henry had a type. And Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, we've learned, you guys have now learned Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. Was Elizabeth really a virgin? No, absolutely not. Didn't she? Didn't she use her
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she did.
Her beauty to sort of help, let's say, ease tensions between countries and sort of find her way in politics. Use that Virgin Queen thing. Now, was she a roaring, we won't use the word slut on here. Well, I just did. No, but certainly there were standards in the Tudor era. But certainly she utilized that sort of, hey, I'm the queen, and look at me, I'm kind of awesome here. So the Tudors it was a fascinating time, Mark, certainly, and there's so much that we could deep dive on. I think just kind of outlining what sort of it meant. The key takeaways for me is sort of the coming out of the Black Death, coming out of that massive depression. Really the kind of, you start seeing the building blocks of what becomes that British Empire. Later on, the increase in wool production and sort of these, big factories coming online, and the trade, the increase in trade. Henry built forts everywhere. He was very, very forward thinking. He loved leading armies. All of these things sort of, when you think of romantic old England, isn't this kind of it?
This is it. This is whenever I think of English medieval times, or this is the images that I saw in this research and the stories that I read. This is exactly what I think of.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of captured an entire, almost genre, if you could.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, you're right. That's what it is. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. I think Mark, have we decided on a topic for next week, or are we going to put that out to a vote?
We have not decided, because we are going to let the viewers decide. So we've got 3 options we're going to be looking at, and we're going to let you guys vote on it. We're going to put out there P.T. Barnum, British Showman. We're going to talk about that. John Dillinger, Public Enemy #1, or Trojan Horse and the Fall of Troy. So we're going to put those 3 options out there. Whatever you want us to chat about, let us know.
All 3 big June events, along with June 28th. I don't know. My wife's birthday was the date that Franz Ferdinand was killed by Gavrila Princip to start World War I, June 28th. So we've got all kinds of things that we could touch on in, to finish up June here. So we'll see what's going on. It was a busy month in history.
Busy month in history. Yep.
All right, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.